The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent, including Olus Media.
Olus Media.
Attacking the podcast world. And based on the true legendary cult classic, Olus Media presents
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Did somebody mention biscuits?
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch.
How bad is it?
Finish you off.
Also, I definitely don't feel fly again. I'm not talking like that, you wiener. What about the tomatoes?
Hey there, wranglers of the red and buffs of the box office. You've landed on the Killer Tomatoes podcast. Today's guest, Chad Peace. Here's your host, the patriarch of those playful, plundering pommes d'amour that have been delightfully disorderly since the days of disco fever, Costa Dillon.
Welcome to the Killer Tomatoes podcast. I'm Costa Dillon, and today we're going to be talking with Chad Peace, who has a long history with the Killer Tomatoes that we'll talk about as part of our interview. So welcome, Chad.
Thanks for having me.
So, Chad, kind of briefly describe how you intersect with Killer Tomatoes.
Well, I was -5 when the first Killer Tomatoes came out.
Now, that needs explaining.
So it came out in 78. I was born in 83. My father, along with you, I think, had a hand in some of the movies. Then I was brought on because there's an actor, George Clooney, that some people have heard of, was in Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and they needed a co-star. So they asked me to, when I was 5 years old, if I could also be in the movie with George Clooney. For those of you who are really Killer Tomato nuts, I was good in about a 3-second scene showing some kids wearing shirts that said good, better, and best. So that was my early introduction to Killer Tomatoes as I grew up, being a part of the Killer Tomatoes family. I was interviewed once for a Food Network show, pilot episode, which probably wasn't a very good interview because I don't think the show ever actually went on the air. Redone the website a couple times in anticipation of various things. We just recently redid the website. We're recording this podcast right now. We're doing a lot of the digital media work and rebranding, and we also have a little special surprise coming soon as an original video for Killer Tomatoes, knowing that not a lot of original videos for Killer Tomatoes have been made in quite a while. So I'll keep the details a secret unless Costa probes really deeply.
If I'm in it, I want to know. So the joke, a good, better, best, I wrote that joke.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, the idea was...
He made me good.
Yeah, well, the idea was any movie fans who would watch credits in those days and saw credit for a best boy and wondered, what the heck is a best boy? We ran that as a quick gag that anybody would pick up on it. To this date, I'm not sure if anybody's ever picked up on what that joke was supposed to be. And people still don't know what a best boy is, which for those of you who are not in film, it's the lead electrician. But the joke was a quick flash, but it was your chance on the set. And as you said, with George Clooney, I assume you were double dating at the time or something,
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what I thought.
We were both at the beginning of our budding careers.
And you went in drastically different directions. So you grew up with tomatoes and the fame that shot brought, I'm sure. Do you still have the T-shirt?
It's probably somewhere in the closet.
And no doubt doesn't fit. Yeah, I can remember you weren't the only kids on that set because one day John Astin brought Sean and Mackenzie, and Sean and Mackenzie somehow had squirt guns with them. And that proceeded to be a raucous day on the set as they proceeded to run around squirting everybody with the squirt guns and so forth, long before either one of them were bona fide actors, before Goonies, in fact. So we did have experience with some kids on the set.
Sorry about that.
So now you are involved in helping put this podcast together. Explain how that works.
Well, my income producing job is doing communications in the digital space, and one of the things when we talk about, hey, how we're gonna revitalize the Killer Tomatoes brand was, how do we do things in today's modern age? So one of the things we did, we just refreshed the website a little bit. If you can check out at killertomatoes.com, that's killertomatoes.com. Another thing we do for a number of our clients is produce podcasts. And so one of the things we said is, hey, we need to get the voice out there. There's a lot of folks that are passionate about Killer Tomatoes and are, I guess, have nothing better to do than, 20-something years later to still be listening to Killer Tomatoes. Well, more than 20 since the last release. And so let's talk about some of the things behind the scenes. There's a lot of folks like George Clooney and John Ashton that, they were in Killer Tomatoes. And there's a lot of people that I see. I'll go out to dinner sometimes here in San Diego, and somehow the conversation comes up. Hey, I heard your father and your family's involved in Killer Tomatoes. My aunt was in Killer Tomatoes. My uncle did this, right? And so, telling some of those stories, and then also, a lot of people don't know a lot of the history that Killer Tomatoes really was one of the first movies with that airplane kind of humor, so. I mean, I just saw something in the Chainsaw Man, for those of you familiar, of where they did a rip on the conference scene in Killer Tomatoes. I mean, it is pretty pervasive throughout that industry. I don't claim to be an expert on film and movies and stuff, but every time it comes up, somehow, some way, somebody has something to say about either somebody that's been involved with it or another movie that referenced it, and so I think it's time to kind of bring that back in anticipation of doing a few more things with the title.
It is a title that seems to live all by itself. We've often called it the best known, least seen film in America because people know the title but then say I've never seen the movie. In fact, I contacted the head of the tomato research program at UC Davis, asked if he wanted to be on the podcast, and he declined. He said he didn't think anybody listening to us would be interested in tomato research. And then he said, and I've never seen the movie. And I thought, what? I can't believe it's not mandatory viewing. How can you be the head of tomato research and never see the movie?
The package is more important than the prize.
Yeah, that's it. Well, at least he'd heard of the movie. That also reminds me of another thing now that you mentioned it, because Chad, in addition to being a media mogul, is also a lawyer. And a lot of people don't realize
really
that Killer,
bad one.
I shall count on that. That Killer Tomatoes is a trademark because I see people, use the term Killer Tomatoes in all kinds of facets and even on products. And they don't realize that we actually have trademarked the name Killer Tomatoes. What's it like trying to protect that trademark?
Well, the testament that you've seen so many things using the Killer Tomato trademark is testament to how bad of an attorney I am. But it is, if you Google Killer Tomatoes, you'll find all kinds of stuff. One of the things that's interesting about this title is, and especially in this day and age, most titles are owned by a big production company or somebody in Hollywood. Our family, along with Costa, have diligently maintained our trademark over the years, including the rights to produce new movies and do those kinds of things. Now, some can argue that has resulted in some stalemate over the years. Some could argue it's resulted in perfect timing.
Indeed, the fact that there isn't a lot of Killer Tomato ripoff movies being made, but the name Killer Tomato in it is testament to the fact that either it is we are successful protecting the trademark, or other people are wiser than us and aren't going to make a movie with the name Killer Tomatoes in it. So, because they want to make movies that make money, and that's never been our accomplished goal.
We have this backwards.
So how did this podcast even come about?
I mean, you're the guy talking to me. You're hosting it, so I mean, we were talking about how to restart the brand and how to get some of that stuff out there, and I think we're sitting in a room with you and my father and everything, and somehow you agreed to do it. I think everybody universally agrees that you're the only funny guy. It's the only reason the movie's funny. And after your budding career, had some additional time on your hands, and so we convinced you to do it. With our producer here, J.C. Polk, and who produces a host of other podcasts, this would be a really good opportunity though to talk about the brand again, do some things that aren't in the behind the scenes clips, and cover things like the book. For those of you who don't know, Jeff Strand, who's a pretty well-known author in his own right, for some reason agreed to do a remake of the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes in its book form. And to everybody's surprise, it was funny. So covering things like that. There's Killer Tomatoes festivals every year, and as I kind of alluded to, there seems to be some progress on the new production front. So, what better way to start talking, getting some information to the fans, bring the brand into the modern era, and hopefully not mess it up.
Yeah, we will be talking to Jeff Strand in a future podcast because his novelization is very funny. He took the script and made it into a book. He's done that with other products, and we're talking with him now about possibility of doing one of the other movies. I meet a lot of people who, when you mention Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, they say, yeah, I haven't seen that movie, or I've seen that movie, and I will say, what about the other three? There are three more? People don't realize there are 4 Killer Tomato movies, and we're like the Star Trek movies. The even-numbered movies are the best ones. 2 and 4 are better than 1 and 3.
I always loved Killer Tomatoes Eat Friends.
Yes, me too.
I don't think anybody likes Strikes Back, though.
I agree. Me too. Neither do I. And the way Killer Tomatoes Eat France came about is when we finished filming Return of the Killer Tomatoes. I wanted to make a joke at the end because all the James Bond films would always say James Bond will return in. So I wrote, the Killer Tomatoes will return in, Killer Tomatoes go to France. And mostly because at the time I'd never been to France. I said, what the heck? We'll go to France. It was mostly a joke. And we ended up going to France.
France and Horton Plaza.
Yeah, at France and Horton Plaza and France in France. We got to film around the Arc de Triomphe and in the Seine, and so forth. The title eventually got changed to Killer Tomatoes Eat France. I don't know who changed the title, actually. I think possibly Fox did, but it worked. I should have written the title of Killer Tomatoes will return in 3 weeks in Tahiti, but I didn't have the foresight to do that.
You can still do it. There's still time. So what's the permitting process like in France anyway?
Well, you hire French people to do it for you. It's basically, we sat for, I think, 3 or 4 hours in de Gaulle Airport getting clearance to get the movie equipment in because, you're doing business in another country. You have to have business permits for the country. But we had
But you actually got them?
France doing. Yep. The French people got them. I'm assuming, we didn't meet any gendarmes while we were filming, so I assume we were legal. But based on what we've done in the U.S. for filming, where we may or may not have had appropriate permits at various times, I don't know. So, Chad, being that you were an actor in the second film, and you're intimately connected with the films, and you've seen them all, what scenes stick out for you? What's your favorite part of the Killer Tomatoes story?
Still, my favorite scene of the movies is, and I should remember every detail, but it's when John DeBello is actually playing the newscaster, and he interviews the lady who had just lost her husband. He said, "What are you gonna do? You're no spring chicken. How are you gonna find another husband? You're no spring chicken." And I don't know, for some reason that scene, always thought it was funny. I also, for some reason, the cherry tomato line just is funny. Oh my God, it's a cherry tomato. Don't know why that one always just sticks out, but those are the funniest scenes. The ones that always come up that you got to laugh at are the conference room scene when they're stuck to the walls. Is pretty iconic. That one comes up a lot of times when people say they actually did watch they got past the title and watched the movie. We talked about a lot, and then of course, anybody who's a really Killer Tomato aficionado knows the history behind the helicopter scene that wasn't supposed to happen. So when you know that becomes a pretty good scene right away. I actually am pretty impressed that not only did the cameras keep rolling, but you got some funny lines while the helicopter's smoking in the background. So
We did. Well, John's interview of the actress is G.J. Sullivan. She's passed away a few years ago, well known in San Diego acting. When the piece of trivia is that DJ and I are the only people who are in all four of the films. So she has a role in all four of the films.
That's only because you were alive for all four.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure your dad was alive for all four of the films. So yeah, that's what's it like growing up watching your dad in a movie like that? I mean, how did that affect you as a kid?
It was a lot better than growing up and my dad being a politician. So
less embarrassing.
Way less embarrassing. Being a bad actor is much more something to be proud of than a good politician, actually. So, I was actually always proud of my dad's career as a politician. I think if those who know him know he's a little different than your average politician. Maybe not exactly politically correct all the time, as you can probably see in the Killer Tomatoes movies. But it was great. I was very blessed growing up. I still am, having a good family and father, being able to be involved in the title. Costa, you letting me, help you produce the podcast and the website. So, that's a pretty cool thing that, a lot of people don't get exposure to. But I always love it when, you can be out somewhere. I mean, I've been in Vienna before talking to other folks who were in an international arbitration program, and Killer Tomatoes comes up, and you got people from Estonia and Spain going, "Oh my gosh, your dad was Wilbur Finletter in Killer Tomatoes," and that's pretty cool. So I can't complain, for any negative that comes out of it. There's 100 positives, and so I feel very blessed about it, and I'm hoping that we can do something to continue on the Killer Tomato legacy.
Yeah, it's just like being Tom Hanks' son. I'm sure there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, well, people usually call me Tom, the Tom Hanks of the modern era.
Ah, okay. Well, I worked on your dad's first campaign, which was for school president when we were in high school. So I feel somewhat responsible for him having become an actually elected politician, and I apologize to many people for that over the years.
As you should.
Happened. Well, you said earlier that I was the funny one, not your dad, but I expect many people in the California State Assembly would beg to differ. So,
well, I mean, there was a time when the worlds came together. I mean, you have to appreciate the, as somebody who comes from a digital marketing, I make a living doing digital marketing. The value of how you call it, guerrilla marketing back then. I'm not sure you could do it anymore, but some of you might remember the newspaper articles about tomatoes showing up on the Sacramento Capitol building, and so
yep.
Hearing those stories about the guerrilla marketing and stuff, and gets your mind thinking. What can you do today? The problem with today is anything you try to do might get thrown in your face, back in your face. Which is my question. I know I'm the guest, but I have a question for you. All right.
Go ahead.
As you're doing this podcast and writing things that perhaps could become a new video or movie, is how do you deal with the ability to be politically incorrect like you were? I don't think some of the original scenes would fly today.
Well, no, a lot of people say you couldn't make movies like Blazing Saddles now, or even All in the Family. That's true. People seem to have lost the ability to laugh at their own absurdities, and I think some of it, yes, it probably maybe we shouldn't have done it in the first place. But on the other hand, the rest of it is well. Always like Steve Martin's line that comedy is not pretty, and you take a chance. And I feel like comedy finds its audience. Drama is kind of universal. What makes somebody cry usually makes somebody else cry, and so forth. But comedy, either you don't get it, you think it's stupid, or you love it. And people tend to pick comedies based on a known factor because of that. They don't take a chance. I like, Mel Brooks comedies, so to speak, or I like somebody likes Adam Sandler comedies because they go to them, but somebody likes them and they pick them for the known quantity. And I think in some ways, Killer Tomatoes is the same way. People get it or they don't get it, and the people who get it, great. And when I first read our first reviews after the first film, and you realize, gee, everybody doesn't like my movie. and Mom, do you like my movie?
I thought you were going to say you're surprised that somebody did like your movie.
Well, no, I thought we were 23 years old. Who's not going to like our movie? And then you start getting a little bit of a thick skin because you realize, yeah, everybody's not going to like it, but somebody's going to like it. And then you'll be happy with the people who are happy with it. But we're talking about something that's oy vey, more than 30 years old now. And how would, at some point, Steve and I aren't going to be here. Like it or not, that's the way the world works. Where would you see Killer Tomatoes going in the future? What is the future for Killer Tomatoes?
That's a good question. I don't think the future is necessarily can be defined right now. I mean, when you look in the digital space, you're going through this crazy hyper development with the introduction of AI. There's all kinds of things are changing, and society changes and stuff. And I think the lasting, what could Killer Tomatoes be, I think is, at the end of the day, I see Killer Tomatoes kind of as a way to make a social / political commentary without being political, without being, taking sides or something. It's just like, let's take an opportunity to laugh at our own inabilities to get things done right and to focus on what's important and not take ourselves so seriously. So I think the opportunity for Killer Tomatoes, whether it's in the form of a new movie or it's in short clips or even in the future of this podcast, is leverage that. That's an opportunity to laugh a little bit, not take ourselves so seriously, and understand that to your point, some people may laugh at something, some people may get offended. Is hopefully it can be something where you can say things and laugh about it, even if you're the one that should be offended, right? Is that the point? Is like, stop getting overly aggressive about things. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of things are messed up, a lot of things are wrong, but at the end of the day, we're all humans, and if we can't laugh at ourselves, then that's a pretty boring world to live in.
Yeah, there is a difference between poking fun at something and being offensive for the sake of being offensive, and
right.
we don't do that. You notice Killer Tomato movies aren't full of scatological jokes or heavy, offensive religious jokes and all that sort of thing. Because we're not trying to insult people; we're trying to have fun.
Right.
And all comedy almost is based on the misfortune of somebody else. That's what makes things funny from the beginning of slapstick. That's what makes things funny. Somebody else's misfortune is funny. And so you can't do comedy unless there's somebody on the receiving end, and you just have to kind of find the right way to do that.
Right. And the hard part is finding the line, right? And I think the reference you make back to the original film is like the line's in a different space back then. The question is, will the line move back, into a different place in the future? We don't know. But can, folks who are involved in Killer Tomatoes do a good job of making sure that line's in an appropriate place, because as you said, at a point it's not funny anymore when you cross the line, or you're making a joke just for the sake of demeaning or something. And if it's it's a joke being made with malintent, it's probably not going to be funny. So but that's also a hard thing to do, is to find out where, because when you make a joke like that and it's made for a mass audiences, these types of jokes, right? There's a lot of people that you have to know where their perspective is coming from. And, today, right now, with the divisiveness of many perspectives and the fact that Killer Tomatoes, does have a political setting, it's really hard for people who may interpret something that you had no intent of making fun of or even being there. They may just interpret because they're sitting at a perspective where everything is an attack on them.
Well, that is our goal, is to unite the world in peace and love, and through Killer Tomatoes. So that is what we continue to attempt. But even the first film, some people are offended by some of the jokes, and particularly I remember we apparently offended the Department of Defense because.
Well, you don't want to offend them.
No, I'd written a letter asking, if we could have the cooperation of the military for filming, so that we could use military. You pay. That's what big movies do, Top Gun and so forth. They get the military cooperates, and I got this very nice letter back from the Pentagon, which I still have, that says no, because your film, quote, demeans the office of the president. And I suppose it does, but apparently that was just too offensive for the Department of Defense, so we did not get any cooperation from the Department of Defense. So all the soldiers you see in the Killer Tomato movies are not actually in the military, so the Army's off the hook there.
You lose some.
Well, Chad, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. How would you like to leave the audience?
Probably through that door behind me.
As fast as possible.
I'd recommend the audience. As I mentioned before, we did do a little redo of the Killer Tomatoes website at killertomatoes.com. We will be expanding and adding the new things that we're doing there. Like this podcast will be available there. Sign up for the newsletter, because we'll let you know as we know the new things that are coming. Like I said, short videos, potentially a new movie. You can go there to find out where you can buy the book. You can go there to find out where you could buy some hot sauce. So I just recommend the readers, look, if you appreciate the Killer Tomatoes franchise, you want to see something new from Killer Tomatoes, go to killertomatoes.com and stay in the loop, and reach out to us, and hopefully you subscribe to the podcast and listen to Costa interview all these much more interesting people than me.
Oh, that just can't be possible. Well, thank you, Chad, for being here. And this concludes another edition of the Killer Tomatoes podcast. I'm your host, Custer Dillon, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Be sure to follow and subscribe whenever you listen to your podcasts. To read the blog associated with this episode, visit olismedia.com. This episode was produced in studios located in San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Baja California. Creative Director Ulises Breton. Sound Engineer Alan Glazepar. Ina Alvarez is co-producer. Serving as executive producer and co-founder is J.C. Polk. And Chad Pease is president and co-founder. Olis Media is an IVC media company.
Olis Media.